What a great night for a book. And not just a book, but a book talk. What's up, YouTube? It's me, MT. And there are two things you probably know about me already. One is that I love science fiction. Two is that I'm a huge Isaac Asimov fan. But one thing you probably didn't know is that I also like nonfiction. And that's exactly what this is. It's not science fiction, but it is Isaac Asimov, with a collection of 66 personal narratives, otherwise known as nonfiction essays. Now, I wasn't familiar with this phrase, nonfiction essay. In fact, I thought that sounded kind of intimidating. But as it turns out, nonfiction essays are pretty interesting. You got to think of it like creative fiction, but in terms of nonfiction. So, creative nonfiction. And the essays that are told in this compilation are all drawn from autobiographical pieces that Isaac Asimov wrote in a magazine that published science fiction short stories. So every issue, Asimov would publish one of these essays that commented on some aspect of science fiction within his life or in society or in history. And it's really fascinating. There's a lot of memorable moments that Isaac Asimov speaks to and ones that have historical relevance. You know, I look at this as something of a period piece. For instance, I had no idea that science fiction was so stigmatized in the early mid-1900s. And that's how he starts off this book, is by commenting on how it was sort of ghetto to write science fiction, or even to read it, to show up at school with a science fiction magazine with ugly dinosaurs and spooling brains. It wasn't favorable, to say the least, and it wasn't valid either for teachers. If, like, for a student anyway, if a student brought in, a science fiction book, the teacher would laugh at them and scoff at them and tell them to read some real book. Like, these aren't things I knew, but one of the crazy things you see is how the genre changes with Asimov. So this guy, if you don't know, he's famous for having written lots of science fiction. By the end of this compilation of essays, he tells you that he's written about 393 books. Books, let alone short stories and other pieces of writing. And we see his writing change throughout the years. Now, this is not his autobiography. That's a separate work that I'm looking to get into. But this captures a lot of the most pivotal moments and exactly what science fiction is as well as what it isn't. Because with the development of the genre, there was sort of this idea that fantasy and science fiction were one and the same. But Asimov dispels this and brings in what the science fiction community believes it to be. That's where I started to really appreciate this work, in that it had such a clear outline for what makes science fiction. And that sounds kind of redundant, but I like how he frames it because it gives me a clear basis from which to understand the works that I choose, as well as if I ever wanted to start writing it. So he gives some great tips in here about how to write it, how to pick names for characters in your books, and even just mentions how you can tell if your work is science fiction. So, all right, I keep saying this. I'm just going to say it. It comes from the book, but he basically says that any good piece of science fiction is based on scientific fact. So there may be this stigma that science fiction is this kind of like popcorn reading and this junk, and it's not worth anything. But this guy was a professor of biochemistry at Boston University for 10 years. And he brings it up. He brings up his work life. But a lot of his works are, very closely tied to scientific concepts. And it's his explanation of the genre, and even looking at other pieces of writing, short stories, other famous writers, is what makes this compilation so valuable. So while I was reading this, I was keeping a log of just books that I should be interested in, authors I should be interested in. I got a couple of them here. I actually bought a couple that Isaac Asimov references. I've got a few more on my watch list. I've got some other authors in mind: Frank Herbert, Robert Heinlein. I might be saying that wrong, but I'll get that in time. This book opened up a world to me, and it was so good that, this is the library edition. I bought a personal edition just to have on the side because two reasons. One is that so much material is referenced in here that I don't want to lose access to. So if I ever want to get one of those books that he mentions, being on the bestseller list, or, another author that he references, I want to know. He mentions magazine issues. I might want to pick up one of those magazines one day just to have it. This also makes great reference material if you ever wanted to use it for some educational or professional experience. So I've brought this into my job in several ways. I've excerpted quotes from here. I've used it as a supplement as far as information goes for teaching. So this is a really nice companion piece. Yes, if you are an Isaac Asimov fan especially, but also if you're just interested in the process of writing and literature and want to know more about a genre that we tend to perceive one way in terms of aliens and all of that, but actually has scientific merit to it as well as narrative merit. So I would highly recommend this book. There are so many memorable moments in here. Just to name a few, one, he's actually criticizing the New York Times editorials. Two, he throws jabs at a few esteemed authors. I'm not going to spoil that, but I think you should read it for that. He mentions, as far as one counterpoint to the common perception of things versus the scientific perception of things in terms of astronomy. So he looks at what makes a galaxy an actual galaxy and why the phrase "a galaxy far, far away" is actually not accurate. And a lot of the autobiographical work is just written so personably that it's hard not to like the guy. There goes my camera. Maybe that's my cue. But I'll leave you with that. I think, Isaac Asimov, I would read a few of his novels first, but definitely keep this book on your watch list. It's one to watch out for. So, if not, find it at your local library. Thanks for watching. I'll see you with more book talks to come.